The Deep Space Monitoring Station detected the anomaly first. Sensors across the hegemony's outer rim territories registered a massive energy signature moving through hyperspace at speeds that defied conventional physics. Within hours, the signature resolved into something impossible: a fleet of over 50 vessels, each one larger than anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. Admiral Corvin received the alert while reviewing conquest reports from the outer colonies. The hegemony had just absorbed 3 new species in the past solar cycle, adding their technology and resources to the ever-growing empire. It was routine work, the kind that had built their civilization into the dominant force across 47 star systems over 3,000 years. The communication from High Command was brief. A new species had been discovered in a remote star system designated Sol 3. Preliminary scans indicated a technologically primitive civilization that had barely achieved rudimentary spaceflight. Their electromagnetic emissions suggested they called their world Earth. Standard integration protocols were to be followed. Immediately, Corvin assembled his fleet with practiced efficiency. The third fleet consisted of 1 massive dreadnought, 12 heavy cruisers, 30 destroyers, and supporting vessels. It was overwhelming force designed to crush any resistance before it could form. The pattern had worked flawlessly for millennia. Arrive with superior numbers, demonstrate technological dominance, demand submission, and either welcome the new species as servants or reduce their homeworld to molten rock. The journey to the Sol system took 18 standard days. During transit, intelligence officers compiled everything they could learn about the humans. The species appeared to be in their technological infancy. They used primitive chemical rockets for space travel. Their weapons were crude projectiles and basic energy systems. Most telling of all, they were divided into numerous competing factions that seemed incapable of unified action. When the hegemony fleet entered Earth's solar system, they broadcast their standard integration message across all frequencies. The transmission was transmitted in every known language, mathematical sequence, and communication protocol the galaxy had developed. The message was always the same: submit to hegemony rule within 72 standard hours or face complete annihilation. The response from Earth came within 6 hours. It was broadcast on a simple radio frequency in what appeared to be the dominant human language. The message was so brief that intelligence officers initially assumed they had intercepted only a fragment. But when they played it back, the full transmission was clear: no, leave our system immediately. Corvin studied the message for any hidden meaning. Every species the hegemony had encountered responded to their ultimatum with fear, desperation, or attempts at negotiation. Some begged for mercy, others offered tribute or valuable resources. Many tried to bargain for the lives of their civilians, but none had ever responded with a simple refusal accompanied by a demand that the hegemony withdraw. The admiral ordered his intelligence staff to analyze human communications for signs of panic or military mobilization. What they found defied their expectations. There was no mass hysteria among the civilian population, no desperate calls for evacuation, no evidence of the fear that typically preceded a species' final moments. Instead, human military forces were activating with calm efficiency. Their space-based assets were moving into defensive positions with precision that suggested extensive preparation. As the deadline approached, Earth's response remained unchanged. Human representatives refused all attempts at communication. They ignored offers of favorable surrender terms. They showed no interest in negotiating for the survival of their species. The silence from Earth was more unnerving than any threat or plea the hegemony had ever received. Lieutenant Commander Thane approached Corvin with growing concern in his voice. The intelligence officer had supervised the integration of 6 species during his career. He understood the psychological patterns that preceded conquest, but the humans were displaying behavior that didn't fit any established model. The human military was not preparing for a desperate last stand. They were not positioning their forces defensively around their homeworld. Instead, they appeared to be organizing for offensive operations. Civilian space stations were revealed to be armed platforms when their weapon systems came online. Cargo. Vessels began moving in attack formations. Most disturbing of all, human forces were advancing toward the hegemony fleet rather than retreating to defendable positions. Corvin reviewed the tactical analysis with growing confusion. The humans possessed no technology that could threaten hegemony ships. Their largest vessels were barely the size of hegemony escort craft. Their weapons operated on principles that were centuries obsolete by galactic standards. Yet they were behaving like a superior force preparing to engage inferior opponents. The 72-hour deadline expired without any change in Earth's position. For the first time in hegemony history, a species had rejected their ultimatum without attempting to negotiate or buy time. The humans had made their choice with a finality that suggested they viewed the outcome as predetermined. Corvin gave the order to commence bombardment operations. Standard procedure called for the systematic destruction of military targets followed by orbital bombardment of population centers. The demonstration of hegemony firepower typically caused immediate surrender. Those few species that continued to resist rarely lasted more than a few hours against superior technology and overwhelming numbers, but as his fleet moved into attack position, something unprecedented happened. Every human vessel, platform, and installation opened fire simultaneously. The attack was perfectly coordinated across multiple planetary orbits. Human forces struck with precision that suggested months of preparation and planning. Their targeting was flawless. Their timing was perfect. The first hegemony ship to take damage was the escort cruiser Invincible. Human projectiles penetrated its shields through focused fire on frequency, resonance points that should have been impossible for the primitive species to identify. As the cruiser's defenses failed, human forces swarmed it with small craft that delivered devastating close-range attacks directly to critical systems. Within minutes of the engagement, Corvin realized that the hegemony had made a fundamental error. The humans were not the primitive species their technology suggested. They fought with tactical sophistication that matched or exceeded hegemony standards. They demonstrated strategic planning that indicated deep understanding of space combat principles. Most importantly, they showed no intention of surrendering regardless of casualties. The battle that was supposed to last hours was entering its most critical phase within the first few minutes. For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Corvin faced the possibility that the hegemony Third Fleet might not achieve its objectives. The humans had turned what should have been a routine conquest into something far more dangerous. The war room aboard the dreadnought Eternal Victory hummed with activity as tactical officers processed incoming data from the initial engagement. Every screen displayed information that challenged everything the hegemony understood about inferior species behavior during conquest operations. The humans were not following any established pattern of resistance or surrender. Lieutenant Commander Thane studied the battlefield recordings with growing unease. His experience analyzing conquered species had taught him to recognize the signs of impending collapse. Primitive civilizations typically showed predictable responses when faced with superior technology: initial shock, desperate defensive measures, attempts at negotiation, and finally acceptance of inevitable defeat. The humans displayed none of these characteristics. Instead, they fought with methodical precision that suggested extensive preparation. Human ships moved in perfect formation despite using communication systems that should have been easily disrupted by hegemony jamming technology. Their weapons targeted specific subsystems on hegemony vessels with accuracy that indicated detailed knowledge of alien ship construction. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to anticipate hegemony tactics before they were implemented. Admiral Corvin watched the tactical display with mounting concern. The escort cruiser Invincible was dead in space, its crew evacuated to nearby vessels. The destroyer Relentless had suffered critical damage to its primary weapon systems. 3 other ships reported significant hull breaches from human attacks that had somehow penetrated advanced shielding technology. The engagement was barely 30 minutes old. and the hegemony was already taking casualties at an unprecedented rate. The human behavior defied military logic. When faced with obviously superior numbers and technology, rational species sought to minimize casualties through strategic withdrawal or negotiated surrender. The humans seemed determined to inflict maximum damage regardless of cost to their own forces. They rammed damaged vessels into hegemony ships rather than allowing them to be captured. They detonated their own installations to deny the enemy any potential intelligence value. Communication intercepts revealed another disturbing aspect of human warfare. Their military personnel showed no fear of death. Hegemony intelligence had monitored thousands of species during conquest operations. All displayed recognizable patterns of psychological stress when facing annihilation. Human communications were calm, professional, and focused entirely on tactical objectives. They discussed their own casualties with the same detachment they showed toward enemy losses. Commander Walsh of the human vessel Defiance had become a particular focus of hegemony attention. His ship was badly damaged and surrounded by superior forces, yet he continued offensive operations without any attempt to withdraw or surrender. When offered terms for his crew's survival, Walsh's response was broadcast on all frequencies. "We didn't invite you here. You can leave the way you came, or you can stay here permanently. Those are your only options." The psychological profiles being compiled by hegemony analysts painted a picture of a species unlike any previously encountered. Humans appear to view warfare as a problem-solving exercise rather than a test of courage or determination. They adapted to changing conditions with remarkable speed. Every tactical innovation the hegemony introduced was countered within minutes. By corresponding human adjustments, Thane presented his preliminary analysis to Admiral Corvin with obvious reluctance. The intelligence officer had built his reputation on accurate predictions of enemy behavior, but the data from the human engagement challenged every assumption about primitive species' capabilities. According to established models, the human fleet should have been destroyed or surrendered within the first hour of combat. Instead, they were holding their own against forces that outnumbered them 5-1. The most concerning aspect of human tactics was their apparent ability to learn during combat. Hegemony weapons that proved effective in early exchanges became less successful as humans developed countermeasures in real time. Their defensive systems adapted to new threats faster than hegemony engineers could analyze the adaptations. They seemed to treat each engagement as a source of valuable intelligence rather than simply a battle to be won or lost. Corvin ordered increased firepower to be brought against human positions. The heavy cruisers moved into bombardment range and began systematic destruction of human installations. Surely the primitive species would recognize the futility of continued resistance when faced with weapons capable of cracking planetary crusts. The demonstration of overwhelming force had never failed to produce surrender in previous campaigns, but the humans responded to escalation with escalation of their own. Hidden weapons platforms revealed themselves and opened fire on hegemony. Capital ships? Civilian installations previously dismissed as harmless space habitats deployed military-grade weapon systems. Most shocking of all, human forces began targeting hegemony command and control systems with precision that suggested they had been monitoring alien communications and identifying critical vulnerabilities. The battle entered its second hour with no sign of human collapse. Hegemony casualties continued to mount as human forces demonstrated increasingly sophisticated tactics. They used debris fields created by destroyed ships as cover for sneak attacks. They coordinated strikes across vast distances with timing that rivaled hegemony computer-controlled systems. They fought with the relentless efficiency of machines combined with the unpredictability of organic intelligence. Intelligence reports from captured human equipment provided additional cause for concern. The technology was indeed primitive by hegemony standards, but it was employed with maximum effectiveness. Human engineers had somehow managed to optimize their crude systems to perform far beyond theoretical specifications. Their weapons were obsolete but deadly. Their ships were small but incredibly maneuverable. Their tactics were simple but devastatingly effective. As the engagement continued, Corvin began to understand that the hegemony had encountered something unprecedented. The humans were not simply another primitive species to be absorbed into the empire. They represented a fundamentally different approach to warfare and civilization. They fought not for conquest or glory, but for the absolute destruction of threats to their survival. They showed no interest in honorable defeat or negotiated settlement. They wanted total victory or total annihilation of their enemies. The realization that humans viewed the hegemony as a species-level threat rather than potential conquerors changed everything about the tactical situation. This was not a standard integration operation. It was a war for survival, and the humans had been preparing for it from the moment the first alien ship entered their system. The 72-hour ultimatum had not been time for them to consider surrender. It had been time for them to prepare for the complete destruction of the hegemony Third Fleet. The chronometer on the Eternal Victory's main display read 14:23, Universal Standard Time, when Admiral Corvin gave the final order to commence full-scale bombardment operations. 2 hours of limited engagement had failed to break human resistance. The time for measured response had ended. The entire Third Fleet would now demonstrate why the hegemony had remained unchallenged for 3 millennia. Every weapon system, across 53 hegemony vessels charged to maximum power. Particle beam arrays that could slice through asteroid belts aligned on human positions. Antimatter torpedoes capable of vaporizing cities loaded into launch tubes. Shield disruptors designed to penetrate any known defensive technology reached. Operational status? The combined firepower pointed at Earth's defenders could have sterilized entire star systems. Commander Mitchell aboard the human flagship Resolution watched the alien preparations with calm detachment. His bridge crew monitored their instruments without visible concern, despite facing annihilation by forces beyond their ability to match. The tactical display showed impossible odds: 53 alien vessels against 12 human ships and various orbital platforms. Any rational analysis predicted complete human defeat within minutes, but rationality had never been humanity's strongest characteristic when facing extinction. Mitchell activated the fleet communication system and transmitted a single word to every human vessel and installation in the solar system: execute. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every human weapon fired simultaneously in a coordinated assault that had been planned and rehearsed for exactly this moment. The human attack was unlike anything the hegemony had ever encountered. Instead of focusing on the largest enemy vessels, they targeted specific systems with surgical precision: communication arrays, sensor clusters, weapon control computers, power distribution networks. They struck at the technological nervous system that made hegemony ships function as coordinated units rather than individual vessels. Within the first minute of the renewed engagement, hegemony fleet coordination began to collapse. Ships that had operated as a unified force for decades found themselves isolated as their communication links failed. Tactical computers that processed battlefield information faster than organic minds could comprehend went offline as human weapons destroyed their sensor inputs. Advanced targeting systems became useless as their guidance networks were systematically eliminated. The destroyer Relentless died first. Human fighters swarmed the vessel like insects attacking a much larger predator. They ignored its heavy armor and massive shields, instead focusing on the small vulnerable points where critical systems connected to the ship's exterior. Within 90 seconds, the destroyer's fusion reactors went critical as its safety systems failed. The explosion took out 2 nearby escort vessels and damaged 3 others. Corvin watched in horror as his fleet began disintegrating under human assault. The aliens were not just fighting with superior tactics. They were dismantling hegemony technology with the precision of engineers who understood exactly how it functioned. Every attack targeted the most vulnerable components. Every strike caused maximum system damage with minimum energy expenditure. They fought like they had been studying hegemony ships for years rather than hours. The heavy cruiser, Invincible, lasted 3 minutes longer than the Relentless. Its enhanced shielding absorbed the initial human attacks while its crew worked desperately to restore communication with the fleet command. But human forces had learned from the earlier engagement. They concentrated fire on the shield generators themselves, overloading them with precisely calibrated energy pulses that caused catastrophic feedback through the ship's power grid. When the shields failed, human bombers delivered nuclear warheads directly into the cruiser's reactor core. Lieutenant Commander Thane struggled to process the tactical data streaming across his displays. The humans were not just winning through superior numbers or technology. They were winning through superior understanding of the battlefield. Every hegemony weakness was being exploited with ruthless efficiency. Every tactical advantage was being neutralized before it could be effectively employed. They fought with the cold precision of machines guided by minds that viewed warfare as a solvable equation. By the 8th minute of combat, half the hegemony fleet was destroyed or disabled. The survivors found themselves fighting individual battles against coordinated human forces that seemed to know exactly where each alien ship would be and what it would do next. Hegemony captains who had commanded successful campaigns across dozens of star systems discovered that their experience was worthless against enemies who had somehow learned to predict their every move. The dreadnought Eternal Victory itself came under sustained attack during the 10th minute. Its massive shields and thick armor had been designed to withstand anything the galaxy could produce. But human forces concentrated their entire remaining fleet against the single vessel with tactics that defied military logic. They rammed smaller ships directly into the dreadnought's weapon emplacements. They detonated nuclear devices against its hull at precisely calculated intervals. They used their own destroyed vessels as projectiles to create cascade failures in its defensive systems. Admiral Corvin realized the unthinkable truth as his flagship's defenses began to fail. The hegemony was not just losing a battle. They were being systematically destroyed by a species they had dismissed as primitive only hours earlier. The humans had turned the engagement into a demonstration of everything the galaxy's dominant civilization did not understand about warfare. Commander Mitchell's voice cut through the chaos of battle as he broadcast on all frequencies. His words were calm and matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing routine fleet maneuvers rather than the destruction of an interstellar empire's military force. Hegemony vessels, you have 30 seconds to power down all weapon systems and prepare for boarding. Any ship that fails to comply will be destroyed without further warning. The chronometer read 1437 when the last hegemony vessel capable of resistance surrendered. Exactly 14 minutes had passed since the full engagement began. In that brief span, 12 human ships and associated orbital platforms had destroyed or disabled 53 alien vessels carrying advanced technology developed over millennia. The impossible had become reality through human understanding of warfare as applied science rather than noble art. Corvin stared at the tactical display showing the scattered wreckage of his fleet. Thousands of his personnel were dead. The survivors existed only because human forces had chosen to accept their surrender rather than completing their annihilation. The Third Fleet, which had conquered dozens of species and never suffered a significant defeat, had been eliminated in less time than it took to conduct a routine tactical exercise. The silence that followed the battle was broken only by damage, reports and casualty lists. Across the hegemony's vast empire, monitoring stations lost contact with the Third Fleet and waited for explanations that would never come. The humans had accomplished in 14 minutes what 3,000 years of galactic civilization had considered impossible. They had proven that the hegemony was not invincible. The emergency session of the Hegemony High Command convened within hours of losing contact with the Third Fleet. 47 star systems had contributed representatives to the council that had governed galactic civilization for 3 millennia. Never in their recorded history had they faced a situation where an entire fleet had simply vanished during a routine integration operation. Supreme Chancellor Voss reviewed the final transmission from Admiral Corvin with growing disbelief. The message was brief and transmitted on emergency frequencies just before all communication ceased. 3 words that changed everything the hegemony understood about their place in the universe. Humans are winning, no explanation. No request for reinforcements. No tactical analysis. Just acknowledgement that the impossible was happening in a remote star. System designated Sol 3. Deep space monitoring stations across hegemony territory reported the same disturbing information. Energy signatures consistent with massive space. Battles had been detected from the Sol system. The signatures had lasted exactly 14 minutes before fading to background levels. No hegemony vessels had emerged from the system. No distress beacons had been activated. 53 ships and their crews had simply ceased to exist. The response from hegemony leadership was swift and decisive. Long-range reconnaissance probes were dispatched to determine what had happened to the Third Fleet. Additional fleets were placed on high alert for potential deployment to the Sol system. Military analysts began developing contingency plans for dealing with an unknown threat that had somehow eliminated their most experienced combat commander and his entire force, but before any hegemony reinforcements could be organized, the humans acted first. Their ships appeared simultaneously in 12 different star systems across hegemony space. Not invasion forces or occupation fleets, but small groups of vessels that broadcast identical messages to every inhabited world they encountered. The transmissions were delivered in perfect hegemony standard, suggesting the humans had learned their language during the brief engagement with the Third Fleet. Commander Mitchell delivered the message personally from the bridge of the Resolution. His image appeared on communication screens across the hegemony empire as he spoke with the same calm precision he had shown during the battle. The human showed no sign of victory celebration or conquest enthusiasm. He delivered his words like a teacher explaining simple facts to confused students. The message was comprehensive and terrifying. The humans identified hegemony military installations by name and location. They listed fleet strengths and defensive capabilities with accuracy that indicated complete penetration of alien security systems. They demonstrated detailed knowledge of political structures, economic systems, and technological capabilities that should have taken years of intelligence gathering to acquire, but the most disturbing aspect of the transmission was not what the humans knew, but how they had learned it. During the 14-minute engagement with the Third Fleet, they had somehow accessed and downloaded the complete database of every hegemony vessel. Personnel records, technical specifications, strategic plans, communication codes. 3 millennia of accumulated information had been copied and analyzed in less time than it took most species to understand they were under attack, Mitchell concluded, his broadcast with words that resonated across every hegemony world. You came to our home and threatened our families. We have responded appropriately. Earth is now off limits to your species. Any hegemony vessel that enters human space will be destroyed without warning. Any attempt to organize military action against humanity will result in the complete elimination of your civilization. We are not interested in conquest or occupation. We simply want to be left alone. The psychological impact on the hegemony was immediate and devastating. For 3,000 years, they had been the species that delivered ultimatums to others. No civilization had ever been powerful enough to threaten them with extinction. The humans had not only demonstrated the ability to destroy hegemony forces, but had proved they possessed detailed knowledge of every strategic weakness in the empire. Admiral Corvin, the sole surviving senior officer from the engagement, was recovered from his disabled flagship 3 days after the battle ended. His debriefing sessions with hegemony intelligence revealed the full extent of human capabilities. The primitive species they had dismissed as another routine conquest possessed tactical abilities that exceeded anything the galaxy had ever seen. Corvin's report described human warfare as applied mathematics rather than military art they had analyzed. Hegemony technology during combat and identified weaknesses faster than alien computers could process the same information. They had coordinated attacks across vast distances with precision that suggested instantaneous communication. Most importantly, they had fought with the absolute determination of a species that viewed the complete destruction of their enemies as the only acceptable outcome. The political consequences spread rapidly throughout hegemony space. Species that had been conquered and absorbed over the centuries began questioning their oppressors' invincibility. If humans could defeat the mighty Third Fleet in 14 minutes, perhaps the Empire was not as powerful as it claimed. Rebellion. Movements that had been suppressed for generations began organizing with new hope. The hegemony High Command faced an unprecedented crisis. Their expansion had stopped completely as military resources were redirected from conquest operations to defending existing territory. Their subject species were showing signs of increasing unrest. Most critically, they had lost the psychological advantage of seeming invincible that had maintained their empire for millennia. Emergency defensive measures were implemented across hegemony space. Fleet patrol patterns were altered to avoid the Sol system entirely. Long-range sensors monitored constantly for signs of human expansion. Military exercises focused on developing countermeasures for tactics that had proved devastatingly effective during the Third Fleet engagement, but the humans showed no interest in galactic conquest. Their ships appeared occasionally at the edges of hegemony space, observing and recording but never attacking unless approached by alien vessels. They seemed content to monitor the empire they had humbled while focusing on their own affairs. Their message had been delivered and understood. Earth was protected by forces capable of destroying any threat the galaxy could produce. The final entry in Admiral Corvin's official report became legendary throughout hegemony military circles. His assessment of human capabilities was brutally honest and deeply unsettling. They are not like any species we have encountered. They do not fight for conquest or glory or resources. They fight for the survival of their civilization, and they are extraordinarily good at it. We must never provoke them again. Within one solar cycle of the 14-minute war, the hegemony had quietly designated the entire Sol system as Forbidden's territory. No military vessels were permitted within 50 light-years of Earth without explicit authorization from the High Command. The humans had achieved what no other species in galactic history had accomplished. They had earned the hegemony's fear and respect through 14 minutes of perfect warfare. 5 years after the 14-minute war, the galaxy had transformed in ways that no political analyst had predicted. The hegemony empire that had dominated interstellar civilization for 3 millennia was fragmenting under pressures that began with humanity's impossible victory. Species that had accepted alien rule for centuries were discovering their own capacity for resistance. The first successful rebellion occurred on Kepler Prime, a world that had been absorbed by the hegemony 800 years earlier. The native population had preserved their military traditions in secret, waiting for an opportunity that seemed hopeless until news of Earth's victory spread through underground communication networks. When hegemony forces arrived to suppress the uprising, they found themselves facing tactics copied from human battle recordings. The rebellion succeeded in 18 days. Dr. Amanda Torres, Earth's first ambassador to galactic affairs, received delegations from 43 different species during her first year in office. The newly constructed embassy station in the neutral zone between human and hegemony space became a pilgrimage destination for civilizations seeking to understand how such a young species had achieved military dominance over ancient empires. Every visitor asked the same question: how had humans learned to fight so effectively? The answer was simpler than most aliens expected. Humans had been fighting each other for their entire recorded history. Every war, every battle, every conflict had contributed to an accumulated understanding of violence that other species had never developed. While the hegemony conquered through technological superiority, humans had learned to win through tactical innovation and strategic thinking. Commander Mitchell, now promoted to Admiral of the Human Defense Force, explained human military philosophy to alien representatives with characteristic directness. Humanity did not view warfare as a noble art or test of honor. They treated it as a problem-solving exercise where the only acceptable solution was complete victory. Their approach to combat was fundamentally different from every other species. In the galaxy, the psychological impact on former hegemony subjects was profound. Species that had considered themselves inferior began rediscovering their own military capabilities. The galaxy's power structure shifted as ancient empires found themselves facing rebellions inspired by human tactics. Civilizations that had submitted to hegemony rule without resistance began developing their own defensive forces, but the humans showed no interest in becoming the galaxy's new, dominant power. Earth's government established strict policies limiting their military involvement in interstellar conflicts. Human forces would defend their own territory and provide tactical advice to civilizations seeking independence, but they refused to become conquerors themselves. They had fought the hegemony for survival, not for the opportunity to build their own empire. The hegemony itself struggled to maintain control over territories that had been stable for centuries. Military resources were stretched thin as rebellions erupted across their space. The confident expansion that had characterized their civilization for millennia had stopped entirely. Their leadership faced the unprecedented challenge of governing through negotiation rather than overwhelming force. Admiral Corvin spent his remaining years writing detailed analyses of human military capabilities for the Hegemony Defense Institute. His reports became required reading for every alien military officer seeking to understand how 14 minutes of combat had changed galactic civilization. His conclusion remained consistent. Humans represented a fundamentally different approach to warfare that conventional military thinking could not counter. The economic consequences of the shift in galactic power were equally dramatic. Trade routes that had operated under hegemony protection for centuries required new security arrangements as alien fleets could no longer guarantee safe passage. Independent systems that had relied on hegemony military might for protection began developing their own defensive capabilities or negotiating mutual defense agreements with neighboring civilizations. Ambassador Torres established the Galactic Defense Academy on Luna to provide tactical training to species seeking independence from hegemony rule. The curriculum was based on human military doctrine adapted for alien physiology and technology. Students learned to fight smart rather than relying on superior numbers or advanced equipment. Graduates returned to their homeworlds with knowledge that transformed local conflicts into successful liberation movements. The changes reached even the most remote corners of hegemony space. Worlds that had been conquered so long ago that their original military traditions were forgotten began rediscovering the arts of war. Ancient weapons were retrieved from museums and modified for modern use. Civilian populations trained in guerrilla tactics that made occupation by hegemony forces increasingly difficult and expensive to maintain. Within a decade of the 14-minute war, the hegemony had lost direct control over nearly 30% of their former territory. The empire that had once seemed eternal was contracting as the costs of maintaining dominance over unwilling subjects exceeded the benefits of conquest. For the first time in their recorded history, hegemony leadership was forced to consider the possibility that their civilization might not survive in its current form. The humans watched these developments with careful attention but limited intervention. Earth's monitoring stations tracked the collapse of the galactic order they had inadvertently triggered, but their government maintained strict neutrality in most conflicts. They provided defensive assistance to species facing genocide but avoided involvement in territorial disputes or political restructuring. Ambassador Torres summarized human policy in her final report to the United Nations Security Council. Humanity had never intended to reshape galactic civilization through 14 minutes of combat. They had simply defended their homeworld with the maximum effectiveness their species could achieve. The consequences were not their responsibility, though they would continue monitoring galactic affairs to ensure that no new empire threatened Earth's security. The legacy of the 14-minute war extended far beyond military tactics or political structures. It had proved that seemingly inferior civilizations possessed capabilities that advanced empires could not predict or counter. The galaxy's assumption that technological superiority guaranteed military dominance had been shattered by a species that fought with creativity rather than advanced equipment. Admiral Mitchell's final entry in the official record of the engagement became the most quoted military document in galactic history. His assessment was characteristically brief. We were threatened in our own home. We defended ourselves. The war lasted as long as it needed to last. We hope it never happens again, but we will be ready if it does. As human exploration vessels began venturing beyond the solar system for the first time, they carried with them the reputation earned in 14 minutes of perfect warfare. The galaxy had learned that humanity's children were always watching, always ready, and absolutely committed to the survival of their species. The brief war was over, but its influence would shape interstellar civilization for millennia to come.